The dust hung thick in the air as Garrett Graham rode along the empty trail, the setting sun casting long shadows across the rugged terrain of West Texas. The year was 1875, and these wild lands near the border town of Presidio had seen their fair share of violence in the years following the Civil War. Garrett adjusted his worn leather hat, squinting against the harsh light, when something unusual caught his eye: a crumpled form by the side of the trail, partially hidden behind a cluster of scrub brush. Drawing his horse to a halt, Garrett dismounted cautiously, his hand hovering near the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. Years of experience had taught him to approach any unexpected situation with caution. As he drew nearer, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a bundle of abandoned goods as he'd first suspected, but a woman. She lay motionless, her dress torn and filthy, her exposed skin covered in a mixture of dust and dark bruises. For a terrible moment, Garrett thought he'd stumbled upon a corpse, but then he saw the slight rise and fall of her chest. "Madam," he called softly, kneeling beside her. "Can you hear me?" The woman's eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of the Texas sky in spring. Her lips parted, cracked and dry, but no sound emerged. Garrett quickly uncorked his canteen and gently lifted her head, helping her take small sips of water. "I'm going to help you," he said, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him at whoever had left her in this condition. "What's your name, madam?" "Beatrice," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Beatrice Campbell, Miss Campbell, I'm Garrett Graham. I've got a place about 3 miles from here. I'm going to take you there so you can rest and recover." Her eyes widened with fear. "No, they might. They might find me." "Who might find you?" Garrett asked, looking around at the empty landscape. "The Blackwell brothers," she managed to say before a coughing fit overtook her. Garrett's jaw tightened. The Blackwell gang was notorious in these parts: rustlers, thieves, and worse. They'd been terrorizing towns across the territory for the past year. "Don't you worry about them right now," he said, carefully gathering her in his arms. She was light, too light, as if she hadn't eaten properly in days. "You're hurt bad, Miss Campbell." Her fingers clutched weakly at his shirt as he carried her to his horse. "Please, they'll kill me." "You'll heal slow," Garrett said with quiet determination as he settled her in the saddle before mounting behind her. "I'll wait. And I promise you this: no one's going to harm you again while I'm around." As they rode toward his homestead, Beatrice slumped against his chest, her consciousness fading. Garrett held her securely with one arm while guiding his horse with the other. His mind raced with questions about what had happened to this woman and what trouble might be following her. But for now, his only concern was getting her to safety. Garrett's homestead came into view just as the last light drained from the sky. It wasn't much: a modest cabin with a small barn and corral, but he'd built it with his own hands after returning from the war, determined to make something of himself away from the ghosts of his past. He dismounted carefully, keeping Beatrice steady in the saddle, then lifted her into his arms again. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake as he carried her inside and placed her gently on his bed. In the lamplight, he could better see the extent of her injuries. Bruises in various stages of healing marked her arms, and a nasty gash on her forehead had crusted over with blood. After stoking the fire in the hearth, Garrett fetched clean water and cloth, along with the small collection of medicines he kept for emergencies. He hesitated, keenly aware of the impropriety of the situation, but the woman needed care, and there was no one else for miles. "Miss Campbell," he said softly, touching her shoulder, "I need to tend to your wounds. Is that all right?" Her eyes opened briefly, confusion clouding them before recognition dawned. She gave a small nod before closing them again. With careful, respectful movements, Garrett cleaned the dirt from her face and arms, revealing more bruises beneath. His hands, calloused from years of ranch work, moved with surprising gentleness as he applied salve to her cuts and wrapped a clean bandage around the wound on her head. When he'd done all he could, he covered her with a blanket and settled into the chair beside the bed. Whatever trouble this woman was in, it had followed her to his doorstep now, and Garrett Graham wasn't a man to turn away from those in need. Morning came with the soft golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Garrett, who had dozed in the chair after checking on his patient throughout the night, woke to find Beatrice watching him with wary eyes. "Good morning," he said, straightening in his chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been the previous evening. "But I'm alive, thanks to you." Garrett nodded and stood, stretching his tall frame. "I'll fix us some breakfast. You need to eat something to get your strength back." As he moved around the small kitchen area, he could feel her eyes following him. "Mr. Graham," she finally said, "I'm sorry to bring trouble to your door." He turned to face her. "You haven't told me what kind of trouble that is yet." Beatrice tried to sit up, wincing at the movement. Garrett quickly moved to help her, adjusting the pillow behind her back. "The Blackwell gang," she began, her hands twisting in the blanket. "They raided our wagon train 3 days ago. We were heading to California, my father, my younger brother, and me." Her voice broke. "They killed everyone. I only survived because I hid under one of the wagons. They found me later, took me with them, said they'd get a good price for me in Mexico." Garrett's expression darkened. "How did you get away?" "Yesterday morning when they were breaking camp. One of them got careless, left his knife where I could reach it. I waited until he was alone, then She swallowed hard. "I stabbed him in the leg and ran. I ran until I couldn't anymore. That's when you found me." Garrett nodded slowly. "They'll be looking for you." "Yes." Fear flickered in her eyes. "I should leave. If they track me here, you're not going anywhere in your condition," Garrett interrupted firmly. "Besides, a woman alone out here wouldn't stand a chance." "I won't put you in danger," she insisted. Garrett brought over a plate with some biscuits and bacon. "Miss Campbell, I was with the Texas Rangers for 3 years after the war. I can handle myself, and I can handle the likes of the Blackwells if it comes to that." Surprise registered on her face. "A Texas Ranger, former," he corrected. "I left that life behind 2 years ago, wanted something simpler." He placed the plate in her lap. "Now eat. We can talk more after you've had some food." Beatrice looked down at the plate, then back up at him. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Graham? You don't know me." Garrett paused, considering her question. "Where I come from, you don't turn your back on someone in need. It's as simple as that." He didn't add that something about her had stirred protective instincts he thought long buried. "Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold." As Beatrice ate, Garrett stepped outside to tend to his horses and check the surrounding area for any signs of unwelcome visitors. The land was quiet, with only the occasional call of a bird breaking the morning stillness. His small herd of cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. For now, at least, they were safe. But Garrett knew the Blackwells wouldn't give up easily. If they were looking for Beatrice, it was only a matter of time before they found their way to his homestead. He would need to be prepared. Over the next few days, Beatrice's strength gradually returned. The bruises on her face began to fade from angry purple to yellowing green, and she was able to move around the cabin with less pain. Garrett insisted she take his bed while he slept on a bedroll near the hearth. They fell into an uneasy routine. During the day, Garrett would work his small ranch, always keeping his rifle close at hand and an eye on the horizon. Beatrice occupied herself with small tasks inside the cabin, resting when needed and helping prepare meals with the limited supplies they had. In the evenings, they would talk. Beatrice told him about her life in St. Louis. where her father had been a successful merchant before deciding to seek new opportunities in California after her mother's death. Garrett shared stories of his time with the Rangers and his childhood in East Texas, though he spoke little of the war or what had led him to seek solitude in this remote corner of the state. On the fourth day, while Garrett was mending a fence on the far side of his property, Beatrice ventured outside for the first time. The warm Texas sunshine felt glorious on her skin after days confined to the cabin. She made her way slowly to the small vegetable garden beside the house, admiring Garrett's careful rows of beans, corn, and tomatoes. She had just bent to pull a weed when the sound of approaching hooves made her freeze. Looking up, she saw 3 riders coming toward the homestead. Fear flooded through her as she recognized the lead rider's distinctive red beard, Otto Blackwell, the youngest and most vicious of the Blackwell brothers. Beatrice ducked behind the water barrel at the corner of the house, her heart pounding. Garrett was too far away to warn. She was on her own. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin. "Hello, the house," Otto called out. "Anybody home?" When no answer came, he signaled to the other men to spread out and search the property. Beatrice pressed herself against the wall of the cabin, desperately looking for an escape route or weapon. One of the men dismounted and headed toward her hiding place. She held her breath as his footsteps grew closer. Just as he was about to round the corner, a rifle shot cracked through the air. "That's far enough," Garrett's voice rang out from the direction of the barn. He stepped into view, his Winchester repeating rifle aimed steadily at Otto Blackwell. "State your business and then get off my land." Otto raised his hands slightly, a cold smile on his face. "No need for hostilities, friend. We're just looking for a lost lamb." "Young woman, pretty despite some rough handling. Seen anyone like that around these parts?" "Can't say that I have," Garrett replied evenly. "Not many travelers come this way." "That's so." Otto's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Mind if we take a look inside your cabin?" "I do mind," Garrett said, not lowering his rifle. "Like I said, state your business and move on." Otto's hand drifted toward his holstered pistol. "You know, being uncooperative with the wrong people can be mighty unhealthy in these parts." "So can trespassing," Garrett countered. "Especially when the property owner is asking you to leave." The tension crackled between them like lightning before a storm. Beatrice hardly dared to breathe, knowing how quickly Otto could turn violent. After what seemed an eternity, Otto chuckled and raised his hands higher. All right. No need to get your dander up. We'll be on our way." He turned his horse but then looked back over his shoulder. "Word of advice, though, if you do happen to come across our missing friend, you'd be wise to let us know. She's got something that belongs to us, and we mean to get it back." Garrett didn't respond, keeping his rifle trained on the men as they rode away. Only when they disappeared from sight did he lower his weapon and hurry to where Beatrice was hiding. "Are you all right?" he asked, helping her to her feet. She nodded, though her legs felt unsteady. "They'll be back," she whispered. "I know," Garrett agreed grimly. "But not today. Come on, let's get you inside." Back in the cabin, Beatrice sank into a chair, her brief burst of energy from earlier completely drained. "I'm sorry, Mr. Graham. I've put you in terrible danger." Garrett busied himself checking the cabin's windows and door. "What did Otto mean when he said you had something that belongs to them?" Beatrice hesitated, then reached into the pocket of her borrowed dress and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "I found this in the saddlebag of the man I stabbed. I took it without really thinking." She handed it to Garrett. "It's a map to a silver mine. From what I overheard, the Blackwells murdered the prospector who discovered it and stole the map from him." Garrett unfolded the paper, studying the crude but clear markings. "This is in the Davis Mountains, about 2 days' ride from here." He looked up at Beatrice. "And they think you have this?" They know I have it, she corrected. Otto saw me take it. That's why he won't stop looking for me. Garrett folded the map and handed it back to her. Then we need to make sure you're not here when they return. He began gathering supplies, moving with purpose around the small cabin. What do you mean? Where would I go, Presidio? Garrett replied. The town marshal there, Sam Hollister, is a good man. He was a ranger with me. He'll help us. Us, Beatrice repeated, clutching the map. Garrett paused in his preparations to look at her directly. I'm not sending you off alone, Miss Campbell. Those men are killers, and I won't have your blood on my conscience. But your ranch will still be here when I get back. His tone made it clear the matter wasn't up for discussion. We'll leave at first light. The Blackwells won't expect us to head toward town. They'll be watching the trails that lead away from Presidio. That night, neither of them slept much. Garrett cleaned his weapons and packed supplies for their journey while Beatrice mended a spare shirt of his that she could wear on the trip, her torn dress being wholly unsuitable for hard riding. As the first hint of dawn colored the eastern sky, they set out. Beatrice rode Garrett's mare, Daisy, while he took his more spirited gelding, Thunder. They kept to the valleys and arroyos where possible, avoiding the higher ground where they might be spotted. The Texas landscape spread out before them, beautiful in its harsh way. Despite the circumstances, Beatrice found herself admiring the rugged country with its mesquite trees and cacti, so different from the lush greenery of Missouri where she'd grown up. How much farther to Presidio? She asked as they stopped to water the horses around midday. If we keep up this pace, we should reach town by nightfall, Garrett replied, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. How are you holding up? Are your injuries troubling you? Beatrice shifted in the saddle, wincing slightly. I'm sore, but I'll manage. She hesitated, then added, Mr. Graham, I want to thank you for everything you've done for me. Not many men would have taken such risks for a stranger. Garrett glanced at her, his expression softening momentarily. You can call me Garrett, Miss Campbell. And I think you would have done the same if our positions were reversed. Beatrice, she corrected with a small smile, and I'm not sure I would have been brave enough. He looked as if he might say more, but instead turned his attention back to the horses. We should keep moving. I don't like being out in the open for too long. As they continued their journey, Beatrice found herself studying Garrett when he wasn't looking. There was a quiet strength about him that she found reassuring. Despite his rough exterior, he had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. In different circumstances, she might have. She quickly pushed such thoughts aside. This was hardly the time for romantic notions, not with killers on their trail and her future so uncertain. They had been riding for several hours when Garrett suddenly raised his hand, signaling for her to stop. He cocked his head, listening intently. What is it? Beatrice whispered, her heart beginning to race. Riders, he replied tersely. Coming up fast behind us. He quickly assessed their surroundings. There's a box canyon about half a mile ahead. We can take cover there. They urged their horses forward, but Beatrice could now hear what Garrett had detected, the unmistakable sound of galloping hooves growing louder by the second. They're gaining on us, she called to Garrett, fear evident in her voice. We're almost there, he shouted back. Just keep riding. They rounded a bend in the trail and the entrance to the canyon appeared before them. Garrett led the way in, then quickly dismounted, helping Beatrice down from her horse. Take the horses deeper into the canyon, he instructed, drawing his rifle. I'll hold them off here. No. Beatrice protested. I won't leave you to face them alone. The sound of approaching riders grew louder. There was no time to argue. Garrett pressed his Colt revolver into her hand. You know how to use this. She nodded, her father having insisted she learn basic marksmanship before their journey west. Good. Only if they get past me, he said grimly. Now go." Reluctantly, Beatrice led the horses behind a large boulder further into the canyon. She positioned herself where she could see Garrett crouched at the entrance, his rifle ready. 4 riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon, pulling up short when they saw the lone figure waiting for them. It wasn't the Blackwells, but a group of rough-looking men Beatrice didn't recognize. "Well, what have we here?" one of them called out. "Looks like somebody's cornered themselves." "This canyon's taken," Garrett replied calmly. "Plenty of other places for you boys to ride." The apparent leader of the group, a man with a scarred face and mismatched eyes, laughed. "That's so." "And who's going to make us leave?" "You and what army, mister?" "Don't need an army," Garrett said, his rifle unwavering. "Just need to be the better shot." The scarred man's smile faded. "We're looking for a woman and a map. Otto Blackwell's offering a handsome reward for both." "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" So they were bounty hunters, Beatrice realized with a sinking feeling. The Blackwells had put a price on her head. "Like I told Blackwell himself yesterday, I haven't seen any woman around these parts," Garrett replied. "That's funny," the scarred man said, "because we've been tracking 2 riders since morning. And unless you've got a mighty small companion hiding somewhere, I'd say you're lying." One of the other men began to edge his horse to the side, trying to get a better angle. Garrett shifted his rifle slightly. "I wouldn't." The tension stretched like a bowstring pulled too tight. Beatrice held her breath, Garrett's revolver heavy in her hand. It was the 3rd rider who made the first move, drawing his pistol with lightning speed. Garrett fired in the same instant, and the man toppled from his saddle with a cry of pain. All at once, chaos erupted. The bounty hunters opened fire as they scattered for cover, bullets ricocheting off the canyon walls. Garrett dropped to one knee, returning fire with measured shots from his Winchester. Beatrice watched in horror as one of the men circled around the side of the canyon, trying to flank Garrett's position. Without thinking, she raised the Colt and fired. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to make the man dive for cover and redirect his attention to her hiding place. "Beatrice, get down," Garrett shouted, firing rapidly to provide her cover. She ducked behind the boulder just as bullets struck where she had been standing moments before. The horses whinnied in fear, pulling at their reins which she had hastily tied to a scrub oak. The gunfight continued for what seemed an eternity, but was probably only minutes. Gradually, the shots from the bounty hunters became more sporadic. Beatrice risked a glance around the edge of the boulder and saw 2 of the men retreating from the canyon, dragging a wounded companion between them. The scarred leader was nowhere to be seen. "Garrett," she called anxiously when the shooting stopped. "Stay where you are," came his tense reply. She heard movement, then a sudden scuffle and a grunt of pain. Peering around the boulder again, she saw Garrett locked in a desperate hand-to-hand struggle with the scarred man, their rifles forgotten on the ground beside them. The bounty hunter had the advantage of size and was forcing Garrett backward, his hands around Garrett's throat. Beatrice's mind raced. She still had the revolver, but the men were grappling so closely that she feared hitting Garrett if she tried to shoot. Looking around frantically, she spotted a hefty branch that had fallen from one of the canyon's few trees. She grabbed it and rushed forward, her injuries forgotten in the moment of crisis. As she approached, Garrett managed to land a solid blow to his attacker's midsection, creating just enough space between them. Beatrice swung the branch with all her might, striking the bounty hunter on the side of his head. The man staggered, momentarily stunned. Garrett seized the opportunity, delivering a powerful right hook that sent the scarred man crashing to the ground, unconscious. Garrett turned to Beatrice, breathing heavily. "I told you to stay back," he managed between gasps for air. "You're welcome," she replied, dropping the branch and handing him back his revolver. Despite the gravity of the situation, a hint of a smile tugged at the corner of Garrett's mouth. "Where did you learn to swing like that?" "I have had a younger brother," she corrected herself, the grief of her recent loss momentarily clouding her face. Garrett's expression sobered. He quickly bound the unconscious bounty hunter's hands and feet with leather straps from his saddlebag. "We need to move quickly," he said, retrieving their horses. "Those others will be back with reinforcements before long." "What about him?" Beatrice gestured to their prisoner. "He'll be fine. Someone will find him eventually." Garrett helped her mount Daisy. "Right now, our priority is getting to Presidio before nightfall." They rode hard for the next several hours, pushing the horses as much as they dared in the hot Texas sun. Beatrice could tell that Garrett was worried. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, and he spoke little as they traveled. By late afternoon, her injuries were making themselves felt again. Every jolt of the horse sent pain shooting through her bruised body, but she gritted her teeth and said nothing, knowing their lives depended on reaching the safety of the town. The sun was low on the horizon when they finally crested a ridge and saw Presidio in the distance, a collection of modest buildings nestled along the Rio Grande. Beatrice felt a wave of relief wash over her. "We made it," she breathed. "Not quite yet," Garrett cautioned. "We still need to get through town to the marshal's office without being spotted by any of Blackwell's men." As they approached Presidio, Garrett led them on a circuitous route that avoided the main street, keeping to the shadows of buildings as much as possible. The town was coming alive with evening activity, ranch hands and miners heading to the saloons after a day's work, shopkeepers closing up for the night, families gathering for supper. They left their horses behind the livery stable and proceeded on foot, moving quickly but trying not to attract attention. Garrett kept his hand near his holster and Beatrice close by his side. The marshal's office was located at the far end of the main street. As they approached, Garrett suddenly pulled Beatrice into the narrow space between two buildings. "What is it?" she whispered. He nodded toward the saloon across the street. "The man in the black vest on the porch, that's Frank Blackwell, Otto's older brother." Beatrice peered cautiously around the corner. The man Garrett had indicated was leaning against a post, casually smoking a cigar while surveying the street. Even from this distance, she could see the family resemblance to Otto. "Now what?" she asked. Garrett thought for a moment. "There's a back entrance to the marshal's office. We'll circle around and come in that way." They retreated deeper into the alley, working their way through the network of narrow passages between buildings. Twice they had to duck out of sight as townspeople passed nearby, and once they nearly walked straight into a deputy making his rounds, but finally, they reached the rear of the marshal's office. Garrett knocked softly on the back door in a distinctive pattern. After a moment, they heard footsteps approaching from inside. "Who's there?" a gruff voice demanded. "Sam, it's Garrett Graham. I need your help." There was a pause, then the sound of a bolt being drawn back. The door opened to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair and a star-shaped badge pinned to his vest. "Graham." Marshal Hollister's weathered face broke into a surprised smile. "Well, I'll be damned. I haven't seen you in." He stopped abruptly when he noticed Beatrice, taking in her bruised face and borrowed clothes. "Who's this, and what kind of trouble are you in?" "This is Miss Beatrice Campbell," Garrett explained, "and it's a long story best told inside." The marshal nodded, stepping aside to let them enter. "Must be serious if you've come all the way to town. You haven't set foot in Presidio in over a year." Once inside the relative safety of the marshal's office, Garrett quickly explained the situation: Beatrice's escape from the Blackwells, the map she had taken, and their narrow encounter with the bounty hunters. And now Frank Blackwell is in town, probably looking for both of us, he concluded. Marshal Hollister had listened in silence, his expression growing increasingly grave. The Blackwells have been a thorn in my side for months, he said, but murder and kidnapping, that's a new low, even for them. He turned to Beatrice. I'm sorry for what you've been through, Miss Campbell. Can you help us, Sam? Garrett asked. The marshal rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Frank's got at least 6 men with him in town. I've only got 2 deputies. Not great odds if it comes to a fight. We don't need to fight them, Beatrice interjected. We just need to get away safely. She pulled out the map and placed it on the marshal's desk. This is what they want. Maybe if we gave it to them, no, Garrett said firmly. That map is evidence of their crimes, and even if we handed it over, do you really think they'd let you live to tell what they did to your family? Beatrice fell silent, knowing he was right. Marshal Hollister studied the map. This mine location is near Fort Davis. The Army has a garrison there. He looked up at them. If you could reach the fort with this evidence, the commanding officer could dispatch soldiers to arrest the whole Blackwell gang. That's at least 3 days' ride from here, Garrett pointed out. We'd never make it with the Blackwells hunting us. You might, the marshal said, if they didn't know which way you were headed. He began to outline a plan, speaking quickly. I'll have my deputies spread word that we've spotted a woman matching Beatrice's description heading south toward Mexico. That should draw Frank and his men in that direction. While we head north to Fort Davis, Garrett finished, nodding slowly. Exactly. I can give you fresh horses and supplies. Marshal Hollister moved to a cabinet and unlocked it, removing extra ammunition and a shotgun. You'll leave at dawn before anyone realizes you were even here. Where do we stay tonight? Beatrice asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. I've got a small room in back, the marshal replied. It's not much, but it's secure. You'll be safe here. As night fell over Presidio, Beatrice tried to rest on the narrow cot in the marshal's back room while Garrett and Hollister finalized their plans in the main office. Despite her physical exhaustion, sleep eluded her as her mind churned with fears and uncertainties. She couldn't stop thinking about her father and brother, their lives cut short by the Blackwells' greed. And now, her presence had drawn Garrett into the same danger. He had already risked so much for her, a woman he barely knew. Why? What kind of man put himself in harm's way for a stranger? The door opened quietly, and Garrett entered with a tray of food. Marshal Hollister had his deputy bring this from the hotel kitchen, he explained, setting it down beside her. You should eat something. Beatrice sat up, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. Thank you, she said, accepting the bowl of stew he offered. What about you? I've eaten. He pulled up the room's only chair and sat down. How are you holding up? She paused, considering her answer. I'm scared, she admitted finally. Not just for myself, but for you too. You shouldn't have to risk your life because of me. I made my choice, Beatrice, he said simply. But why? She pressed. You could have just as easily turned me away when you found me on the trail or handed me over to the Blackwells when they came to your ranch. It would have been safer for you. Garrett was silent for a long moment. After the war, he began slowly, I saw too many people looking the other way when others needed help. I promised myself I wouldn't be one of them. He met her eyes. Besides, anyone who would leave a woman beaten and abandoned on a lonely trail deserves whatever trouble comes their way. There was something in his gaze, a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, neither spoke, the connection between them almost tangible in the small room. Garrett broke the silence first, clearing his throat. You should try to get some sleep. We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow. As he stood to leave, Beatrice reached out and caught his hand. Thank you, Garrett, she said softly. Not just for saving my life, but for believing me, for helping me, for everything." His fingers tightened briefly around hers before he gently withdrew his hand. "Get some rest," he repeated, his voice slightly rougher than before. He left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Beatrice finished her meal and lay back down, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. Despite the danger that still surrounded them, she felt strangely at peace. Whatever happened tomorrow, she wasn't facing it alone. True to Marshal Hollister's plan, they set out at first light. The town was still quiet, most of its inhabitants not yet stirring. The marshal provided them with fresh horses, supplies, and a detailed map of the route to Fort Davis. "My deputies have already started spreading rumors about a woman matching Beatrice's description seen heading for the border," he told them as they prepared to leave. "With any luck, Frank Blackwell and his men will be riding south while you head north." "We're grateful for your help, Sam," Garrett said, shaking the marshal's hand. "Just be careful out there," Hollister replied. "The Blackwells aren't known for giving up easily." "We will be," Beatrice promised. They rode out of town using the back streets and trails, keeping away from the main road. Once they were a few miles north of Presidio, they picked up their pace, wanting to cover as much ground as possible before news of their deception reached the Blackwells. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they headed into the Davis Mountains. Towering peaks and deep canyons made for slow going in places, but also provided excellent cover. Garrett set a steady pace, careful not to push the horses too hard in the rising heat. They spoke little as they rode, both keenly aware of the need for vigilance. Beatrice found herself watching Garrett as he navigated the difficult terrain, admiring his quiet competence and the way he seemed at home in this wild country. By midday, they had made good progress. They stopped to rest the horses in the shade of a rocky overhang, sharing a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "How much farther to Fort Davis?" Beatrice asked, stretching her sore muscles. "If we keep up this pace, we should reach it by tomorrow evening," Garrett replied. He studied her face. "How are you holding up? Your bruises look like they're healing." Beatrice touched her cheek self-consciously. "I feel stronger every day." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what happens after we reach the fort. Once the army arrests the Blackwells, I suppose I should continue on to California as my father planned." Garrett looked away, focusing on adjusting his horse's saddle. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no family there, no connections. My father's business associate in San Francisco might take me in, but—" She trailed off, unsure how to express the turmoil of her feelings. "You have time to decide," Garrett said quietly. "No need to rush into anything." Before Beatrice could respond, the distant sound of a gunshot echoed through the canyon. They both tensed, immediately alert. "Could be a hunter," Beatrice suggested hopefully. Garrett shook his head. "Too close to our trail for comfort." He quickly gathered their things. "We need to move. Now." They mounted up and continued northward, but now at a faster pace. Garrett led them on a winding route, using the natural features of the landscape to obscure their trail whenever possible. As they rode, Beatrice noticed Garrett checking the position of the sun frequently, his expression growing more concerned as the afternoon wore on. "What's wrong?" she finally asked. "We're making good time, but I don't like the look of those clouds," he replied, nodding toward the western horizon where dark thunderheads were gathering. "Summer storms in these mountains can be dangerous. We need to find shelter before it hits." The wind began to pick up, carrying the scent of rain. Beatrice could feel the temperature dropping as the storm approached. Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by the low rumble of thunder. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead," Garrett told her, raising his voice against the rising wind. "We can wait out the storm there." They urged their horses forward as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. By the time the line shack came into view, a small, weathered structure nestled against a rocky hillside, the rain was coming down in sheets, driven by fierce gusts of wind. They dismounted quickly and led the horses to a lean-to attached to the side of the shack. Once the animals were secured, they hurried inside. The interior was sparse but dry: a small table, 2 stools, a stone fireplace, and a narrow bunk covered with a dusty blanket. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel in St. Louis," Garrett commented as he shook the water from his hat, "but it'll keep us dry." "It's perfect," Beatrice replied sincerely, grateful to be out of the storm. Garrett found some firewood stacked beside the fireplace and soon had a small fire going, its warm light filling the shack as the storm raged outside. The thunder was directly overhead now, crashing so loudly that Beatrice could feel it in her chest. She removed her sodden jacket and moved closer to the fire, extending her hands toward its warmth. Garrett rummaged through their saddlebags and produced a tin of coffee and some dried beans. "It's not much, but it'll be hot," he said, setting up a small pot over the fire. "Right now, hot is all that matters," Beatrice replied with a smile. She watched as he efficiently prepared their simple meal. Struck again by the contradiction, he presented a hard man capable of great gentleness, a loner who had unhesitatingly come to her aid. As they ate, the storm showed no signs of abating. Rain lashed against the small window, and wind howled around the corners of the shack. Occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the interior with harsh white light. "Looks like we might be here for a while," Garrett observed, glancing out at the deluge. Beatrice nodded, trying to ignore the inappropriate intimacy of their situation alone together in this tiny shelter, miles from the nearest town or ranch. In normal circumstances, such an arrangement would be scandalous, but nothing about their situation was normal. "Tell me more about your life before all this," she said, partly to distract herself from their proximity. "You mentioned you were with the Texas Rangers after the war," Garrett nodded, his expression guarded. "For 3 years. After what I saw during the war, I wanted to do something that felt right. The Rangers were bringing law to places that had none." "Why did you leave?" He was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "There was an incident. A gang of cattle rustlers had killed a rancher and his son. We tracked them to a hideout in the Chizos Mountains. The fight was bad. When it was over, I realized I was tired of violence, tired of seeing men die." He looked up at her. "So I bought that little piece of land near Presidio and tried to make a different kind of life for myself." "A peaceful one," Beatrice said softly. "That was the idea," he agreed with a rueful smile. "Until you showed up and brought trouble to my door." "I'm sorry about that," she began, but he waved away her apology. "I was joking, Beatrice. The truth is—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "The truth is, I don't regret finding you on that trail. Not for a second." Their eyes met across the small space, and Beatrice felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. There was something in his gaze that made her heart beat faster, something she hadn't expected to find in this dangerous journey. The moment was broken by a particularly loud crack of thunder that made them both jump. Garrett cleared his throat and stood, moving to check the window. "Storm's not letting up," he reported. "We should try to get some rest while we can. You take the bunk. I'll make do on the floor." Beatrice wanted to protest, to tell him that wasn't necessary, but she knew it was the proper thing to do. Instead, she nodded and moved to the narrow bunk while Garrett spread his bedroll near the fire. As she lay down, pulling the dusty blanket around her, Beatrice found herself acutely aware of Garrett's presence just a few feet away. The steady rhythm of the rain on the roof should have been soothing, but sleep seemed impossibly distant. "Garrett," she whispered after a while, unsure if he was still awake. "Yes," came his immediate reply. "You think we'll make it? To Fort Davis, I mean." There was a pause before he answered. "Yes," he said with quiet confidence. "I'll get you there safely, Beatrice. I promise." Something in his voice, the certainty, the protectiveness, made her feel safer than she had since her family's wagon train was attacked. Despite the danger still pursuing them, despite the storm raging outside, Beatrice closed her eyes and finally drifted into sleep. She dreamed of her father and brother, of the life they had planned in California. But when she woke just before dawn, it was Garrett's face that filled her mind. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a washed clean sky and air that smelled of wet earth and pine. Garrett was already awake, tending to the horses and repacking their supplies. "Good morning," he greeted her as she stepped outside, squinting in the bright morning light. "Sleep well, better than I expected," she admitted. "What about you?" he shrugged. "I've slept on worse." They ate a quick breakfast and set out again, making good time on the rain-softened trail. The mountains around them glistened in the morning sun, the storm having revealed colors in the rocks that had been hidden by dust the day before. "It's beautiful," Beatrice remarked as they rode side by side through a wide valley. "I never expected the desert to be so alive." Garrett nodded. "Most people see only the harshness when they first arrive. It takes time to notice the beauty." "Is that why you stayed? After you left the Rangers?" "Partly," he admitted. "There's a freedom here that I never found back east. Room to breathe, to be yourself without anyone looking over your shoulder. And room to be alone," Beatrice observed quietly. Garrett glanced at her. "That too," he acknowledged. "Though lately I've been wondering if being alone is really what I want." Before Beatrice could respond to this surprising admission, Garrett suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. "What is it?" she asked, instantly tense. He pointed to a rise about half a mile ahead where several riders had appeared, moving perpendicular to their path. "Riders. Too far to tell who they are, but we shouldn't take chances." They veered off the trail, seeking cover among a stand of juniper trees. From this vantage point, they watched as the distant riders continued across the landscape. "I count 5, Garrett murmured. "And they're heading east, not north or south." "Do you think it's the Blackwells?" Beatrice whispered. "Can't be sure from this distance, but it's possible," he replied grimly. "If they figured out Marshal Hollister's deception, they might have guessed we're heading for Fort Davis." "What do we do now?" Beatrice asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. Garrett studied the terrain ahead. "We'll have to change our route. There's another way to the fort, longer but less traveled. It takes us through Apache territory, but that might be safer than running into the Blackwells right now." "Apache territory," Beatrice repeated, alarmed. "But I thought the Mescalero Apache in these parts have a treaty with the government," Garrett explained. "They're generally peaceful unless provoked. I've dealt with them before, during my ranger days. We should be all right if we're respectful and keep to ourselves." It wasn't an ideal solution, but Beatrice trusted Garrett's judgment. They waited until the riders had disappeared from view, then continued on their journey, now heading northeast into more heavily forested mountains. The new route was challenging, with steep inclines and narrow passes that forced them to proceed slowly. By midday, they had entered a region of dense pine forest quite different from the open desert they had traveled through earlier. "We're making good progress," Garrett told her as they stopped to rest the horses by a small stream. "If we keep this pace, we should reach the fort by tomorrow afternoon." "Will we be camping in the forest tonight?" Beatrice asked, looking around at the thick trees with a mixture of appreciation and unease. Likely so, Garrett replied. There's a clearing about 5 miles ahead that would make a good campsite. We should reach it before dark. As they continued their journey, Beatrice found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet strength of the man riding beside her. Over the past days, she had seen Garrett Graham in many lights as a rescuer, a protector, a fighter when necessary, but also as a man of compassion and unexpected gentleness. The more she learned about him, the more she wanted to know. They had just entered a narrow canyon when Garrett suddenly pulled up short, raising his hand for silence. Beatrice halted beside him, instantly alert. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the rocky walls on either side of them. Finally, he pointed to a small movement on the ridge above a flash of color that didn't belong to the natural landscape. "We're being watched," he said softly. Even as he spoke, figures appeared along the rim of the canyon, men on horseback, their faces impassive as they looked down at the travelers. Beatrice counted at least 8 of them. "Apache?" she asked, her mouth suddenly dry. Garrett nodded. "Stay calm, let me do the talking." One of the men, distinguished by the eagle feather in his hair and his commanding presence, raised his hand in a gesture that was neither threatening nor particularly welcoming. After a brief conversation with the others, he guided his horse down a narrow path to the canyon floor, approaching Garrett and Beatrice with measured dignity. "Garrett Graham," the man said in clear English, surprising Beatrice. "It has been many seasons since you rode these trails." "Chief Victorio," Garrett replied respectfully. "I did not expect to find you in these mountains." "The hunting is good here," the chief replied. His dark eyes moved to Beatrice. "You travel with a woman. This is unusual for you." Garrett explained their situation briefly, not the full details of Beatrice's ordeal or the map, but enough to convey that they were fleeing dangerous men and seeking the safety of Fort Davis. Chief Victorio listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. When Garrett finished, he remained silent for a long moment. "The men who hunt you," he said finally, "they have killed many." "Yes," Garrett confirmed, "including this woman's father and brother." The chief nodded slowly. "Such men bring trouble to all who cross their path, white, Mexican, Apache. It makes no difference to them." He seemed to come to a decision. "You may camp tonight in our village. No white man will find you there." Beatrice glanced at Garrett, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected offer. His face revealed surprise, but not alarm. "We are grateful for your hospitality, Chief Victorio," Garrett said with a slight bow of his head. The Apache leader turned his horse, gesturing for them to follow. The other warriors fell in around them, creating an escort that was both protection and, Beatrice suspected, a means of ensuring they didn't stray from the path. They rode for another hour, leaving the canyon and climbing into higher country. Eventually, they crested a ridge and saw below them a small valley where perhaps 30 lodges were arranged in a semicircle. Women moved about the camp, working at various tasks, while children played and dogs roamed freely. As they descended into the village, Beatrice was acutely aware of the curious stares directed their way. Few white women had likely ever visited this place, and her fair hair and blue eyes made her especially conspicuous. Chief Victorio led them to a lodge near the center of the village. "You will stay here," he told them, dismounting. "My people will care for your horses. When the sun sets, you will join us to eat." With that, he left them, speaking rapidly in his own language to several of the warriors who had accompanied them. "Is this safe?" Beatrice whispered to Garrett once they were alone in the lodge. "Safer than being out in the open with the Blackwells searching for us," he replied. "Chief Victorio is a man of honor. If he has offered us protection, we can trust it." The lodge was simply furnished with woven mats and furs for sitting and sleeping. A small fire pit in the center provided warmth and light. Beatrice sat down, grateful for the chance to rest after the long day's ride. "How do you know Chief Victorio?" she asked as Garrett settled across from her. "I met him during my time with the Rangers," he explained. "There was a misunderstanding between his people and some settlers. I helped negotiate a peaceful resolution. He has a good memory for faces and favors. Will he really protect us from the Blackwells?" "If they come here looking for us, yes," Garrett assured her. "The Apache have their own code of hospitality. Once you're accepted as a guest, they'll defend you as they would one of their own." This was reassuring, though Beatrice still felt out of place in these unfamiliar surroundings. She had heard stories about the Apache. Of course, most of them painting them as dangerous savages, but the reality before her eyes contradicted those tales. What she saw was a well-organized community going about their daily lives with purpose and dignity. As the afternoon wore on, they were brought fresh water and some dried meat by a young Apache woman who regarded Beatrice with undisguised curiosity, before departing without a word. When evening came, they were escorted to the center of the village where a large fire burned. The entire community had gathered, sitting in a circle around the flames. Chief Victorio motioned for them to sit beside him. The meal was simple but satisfying: roasted venison, wild greens, and a type of bread Beatrice had never tasted before. She ate carefully, conscious of the many eyes upon her. Garrett, she noticed, seemed completely at ease, conversing with the chief and accepting the hospitality with natural grace. After the meal, one of the older men began to speak, telling a story that was translated in fragments by a younger man who knew some English. It was a tale of the tribe's ancestors and the mountains they called home, filled with spirits and animals that spoke with human voices. Beatrice found herself drawn into the rhythm of the storytelling, the cadence of the unfamiliar language somehow soothing. Looking around at the faces illuminated by firelight, she saw the same rapt attention in the eyes of children and elders alike. Later, as they returned to their lodge, Beatrice felt a strange sense of peace despite their precarious situation. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said to Garrett as they sat by their own small fire. "I never expected to experience anything like this." "The Apache aren't what most people think," he replied. "They've been fighting to preserve their way of life against impossible odds. I respect that." "Will they really help us reach Fort Davis?" "Chief Victorio has offered to send 2 of his warriors with us tomorrow as guides," Garrett said. "They know paths through these mountains that few white men have ever seen. We'll be at the fort before the Blackwells even know which direction we've gone." Beatrice nodded, relief washing over her. For the first time since her family's wagon train was attacked, she felt a genuine hope that she might survive this ordeal. And after Fort Davis? She asked, the question that had been lingering in her mind finally finding voice. "What happens then?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "That depends," he finally said, his voice low. "On what?" He looked up, meeting her eyes across the flames. "On what you want, Beatrice." Her heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. "What if I don't know what I want anymore? Everything I planned, everything I expected for my future, was destroyed when the Blackwells attacked our wagon train." "Then perhaps it's time to consider new possibilities," Garrett suggested quietly. "Such as," he hesitated, then spoke with careful deliberation. "Such as staying in Texas, in Presidio. There's good land there, good people, a place where you could build a new life. Alone." Beatrice asked, hardly daring to breathe. Garrett's eyes never left hers. "Not necessarily." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Beatrice felt a flutter of something that might have been fear or excitement or both. Garrett, he raised a hand, stopping her. You don't need to answer now. There's time. First, we need to get you safely to Fort Davis and deal with the Blackwells. She nodded, grateful for the reprieve. Her feelings for Garrett had grown with each passing day, but everything had happened so quickly, and the shadow of her family's murder still hung heavy over her heart. She needed time to sort through her emotions. We should get some rest, Garrett said, rising to his feet. Tomorrow will be another long day. As Beatrice settled onto the sleeping mat provided by their Apache hosts, she found her thoughts drifting to what Garrett had implied. A new life in Texas, perhaps with him at her side. It was nothing like the future she had imagined for herself, and yet the idea filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire still burning low in the center of the lodge. She fell asleep with that warmth still coursing through her, dreaming not of the past she had lost, but of possibilities she had never considered. Morning came with the sounds of the Apache village stirring to life. Garrett was already awake and outside when Beatrice emerged from the lodge, blinking in the bright sunlight. He was deep in conversation with Chief Victorio and two younger warriors. "Good morning," he greeted her as she approached. "Our guides are ready whenever we are." Chief Victorio's scouts report no sign of the Blackwells in the immediate area, but we shouldn't delay. They ate a quick breakfast and prepared to depart. As promised, two Apache warriors would accompany them, Silent Fox and Black Knife, both skilled trackers who knew the mountains intimately. Chief Victorio approached Beatrice before they left, something held carefully in his hands. "For the woman who rides with courage," he said, presenting her with a small amulet of polished turquoise set in silver. "It will protect you on your journey." Touched by the unexpected gift, Beatrice accepted it with sincere thanks. "I will treasure it always," she promised, slipping the cord over her head. With final farewells exchanged, they set out from the village, the two Apache guides leading the way on sleek ponies that moved with impressive agility over the rough terrain. The trail they followed would never have been discovered by Beatrice or even Garrett on their own, a narrow path that wound through steep ravines and across seemingly impassable ridges. Several times they were forced to dismount and lead the horses through particularly difficult passages. Despite the challenges, they made excellent progress. By midday, Silent Fox pointed to a distant landmark and spoke to Garrett in a mixture of English and Apache. "He says we're less than 10 miles from Fort Davis now," Garrett translated for Beatrice. "We should reach it before sunset." Relief flooded through her. Soon they would be safe, the evidence of the Blackwells' crimes in the hands of the authorities. Justice for her father and brother was finally within reach. They stopped briefly to rest the horses and eat some of the dried meat the Apache had provided. As they prepared to continue their journey, Black Knife suddenly tensed, turning his head slightly as if listening. Silent Fox immediately moved to higher ground, scanning the terrain behind them. After a moment, he called down to his companion in their native tongue. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, alarmed by their behavior. "Riders," Garrett replied grimly. "Coming fast from the south. The Blackwells, possibly. Our Apache friends aren't taking any chances." He quickly checked his rifle. "We need to move. Now." They mounted up and continued at a faster pace, the Apache guides leading them into even more rugged country. Beatrice could feel the tension radiating from Garrett as he repeatedly glanced back over his shoulder. They had just descended into a narrow valley when the sound of distant gunfire reached them. Black Knife immediately urged them toward a stand of trees for cover. "They've spotted us," Garrett said tersely. "How many?" Silent Fox. The Apache held up 5 fingers, then pointed in different directions. The pursuers had spread out, trying to surround them. "Can we outrun them?" Beatrice asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Not in this terrain," Garrett replied. "Our horses are tired and they know it." He exchanged a quick look with the two Apache. "We need to make a stand. Here in these trees. It's our best chance." Silent Fox nodded in agreement, already dismounting and securing the horses. Black Knife moved silently to the edge of the trees, assessing their defensive position. "Beatrice," Garrett said, helping her down from her horse, "I need you to stay low and keep behind cover. No matter what happens, don't expose yourself." She nodded, clutching the revolver he handed her. "I'll be careful." Garrett positioned himself behind a fallen log with a clear view of the approach to their position. Silent Fox took up a spot to his right, while Black Knife melted into the trees to the left, virtually invisible. They didn't have to wait long. 5 riders appeared at the far end of the valley, moving cautiously now. Beatrice recognized Otto Blackwell in the lead, his red beard unmistakable even at this distance. Beside him rode his brother Frank, and behind them 3 men she didn't know hired guns, most likely. "Let them get closer," Garrett murmured. "We need to make every shot count." The Blackwells advanced slowly, clearly suspecting an ambush. When they were about 100 yards away, Otto raised his hand, halting the group. "Graham," he shouted, "we know you're in there. Send out the woman and the map, and you might live to see another day." "Doesn't seem like much of an offer," Garrett called back. "Especially coming from men who murder innocent families." Otto spat on the ground. "Have it your way." He signaled to his men, who immediately spread out, seeking cover of their own. The valley erupted in gunfire. Bullets thudded into trees and whined off rocks as the Blackwells laid down a barrage of lead. Garrett returned fire methodically, aiming carefully before each shot. Silent Fox and Black Knife were equally deliberate, conserving their ammunition. Beatrice pressed herself against the earth, heart pounding as the battle raged around her. Through gaps in the trees, she could see the Blackwells attempting to work their way closer, using boulders and depressions in the ground for cover. One of the hired guns made a dash for a closer position. Silent Fox's rifle cracked, and the man fell, clutching his shoulder. Another tried to circle around to their flank, but Black Knife materialized from the trees like a shadow, his knife flashing. The man's scream was cut short. "They're trying to get behind us," Garrett warned, shifting his position to cover a new threat. Otto Blackwell had used the distraction to advance to within 50 yards of their position. He fired rapidly, forcing Garrett to duck behind the log as splinters flew. In that moment, Frank Blackwell made his move, charging toward their position from the right. Silent Fox rose to meet the threat, but a bullet from Otto caught him in the side, spinning him to the ground. Beatrice saw Frank bearing down on them, a cold grin on his face as he raised his pistol toward the fallen Apache. Without thinking, she raised her revolver and fired. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to make Frank veer off course, buying Silent Fox precious seconds to roll behind a tree. "Beatrice, stay down," Garrett shouted, firing at Frank and forcing him to retreat. The battle had reached a stalemate, neither side able to advance without exposing themselves to deadly fire. But Beatrice knew they were in trouble. Silent Fox was wounded, their ammunition was limited, and the Blackwells seemed content to wait them out. Just when the situation seemed most desperate, a new sound reached them, the rhythmic drumming of many hooves approaching from the north. Both sides paused in their firing, uncertain what this new development might mean. Over the ridge came a column of blue-uniformed cavalry soldiers, at least 20 strong, led by an officer whose saber flashed in the afternoon sun. "United States Cavalry," the officer shouted. "Drop your weapons, all of you. Otto Blackwell's face contorted with rage. Instead of complying, he swung his rifle toward the soldiers. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Multiple rifles fired, and Otto toppled from his saddle. Frank Blackwell and the remaining hired gun immediately threw down their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. Garrett stood slowly, keeping his rifle visible but pointed at the ground. "Captain," he called to the officer, "I'm Garrett Graham. These people with me are friendlies. We've been trying to reach Fort Davis." The cavalry officer approached, eyeing them warily. "Lieutenant Phillips, 9th Cavalry," he introduced himself. "We were on patrol when we heard gunfire. What's this about?" Quickly, Garrett explained the situation: Beatrice's ordeal, the map proving the Blackwells had murdered the prospector, and their journey to bring evidence to the fort. Lieutenant Phillips listened attentively, then nodded. "We've been after the Blackwell gang for months. They've raided ranches all across the territory." He looked at Beatrice with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for what you've endured, madam. Rest assured, these men will face justice for their crimes." While soldiers secured the prisoners and tended to Silent Fox's wound, which fortunately proved less serious than initially feared, Beatrice stood beside Garrett, watching the activity with a sense of unreality. It was over. After days of fear and flight, the nightmare had ended with the sudden arrival of the cavalry. "Are you all right?" Garrett asked softly, noting her distant expression. Beatrice nodded slowly. "I think so. It's just hard to believe it's really over." He tentatively placed a hand on her shoulder. "Not entirely. There will be a trial. You'll need to testify." "I know," she acknowledged, "and I will, for my father and brother, for everyone the Blackwells have hurt." She looked up at him, her eyes clear and determined. "But after that, Garrett?" "After that, I think I'm ready to consider those new possibilities we talked about." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Are you now?" "Yes," she said simply. "I am." Before he could respond, Lieutenant Phillips approached them. "We'll escort you to Fort Davis," he said. "Your Apache friends are welcome to come as well, though I suspect they'll prefer to return to their people." He was right. Once it was clear that Silent Fox could travel, he and Black Knife declined the offer to accompany them to the fort, preferring to make their own way back to Chief Victorio's village. Beatrice approached them before they departed. "Thank you," she said, touching the turquoise amulet still hanging around her neck, "for everything." Silent Fox nodded gravely. "The woman with sky-colored eyes has a strong heart," he said in halting English. "Chief Victorio chose well." With that, the two Apache warriors mounted their ponies and disappeared back into the mountains as silently as they had guided Garrett and Beatrice through them. The journey to Fort Davis was uneventful. Frank Blackwell and the surviving hired gun rode with their hands bound, surrounded by vigilant soldiers. The body of Otto Blackwell was slung across his horse, a grim reminder of the price of his crimes. As the fort came into view, a collection of sturdy buildings surrounded by a high wall, Beatrice felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This had been their goal for so long, the place where justice would begin, and now they had reached it. The fort commander, Colonel Randall, received them in his office, listening gravely to their story and examining the map that had cost so many lives. He assured them that the surviving Blackwells would be held securely until their trial. "Miss Campbell," he said when they had finished their account, "you have shown remarkable courage through this ordeal. The Army will ensure that justice is served for your family." "Thank you, Colonel," Beatrice replied. "That means more than I can express." They were provided with separate quarters within the fort's simple but comfortable rooms where they could rest and recover from their journey. Beatrice was given clean clothes by the colonel's wife, who expressed horror at her ordeal, and insisted on having a hot bath prepared for her. That evening, after the best meal she'd had in weeks, Beatrice sat on a bench outside her quarters, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The fort was peaceful, the sounds of soldiers going about their duties strangely comforting after so many days of danger. Footsteps approached, and she looked up to see Garrett walking toward her. He had cleaned up as well, shaved his travel-worn beard, and changed into clothes borrowed from one of the officers. The transformation was striking. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the bench. "Please," she replied, moving over to make room. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling evening air. For a while neither spoke, content to share the silence and the star-filled sky. "Colonel Randall says we'll need to stay at the fort for at least a week," Garrett finally said. "They're sending riders to Presidio and other towns to gather witnesses and evidence against the Blackwells." Beatrice nodded. "Mrs. Randall has already insisted I stay as her guest for as long as necessary. She's been very kind." "And after the trial?" Garrett asked, his tone carefully neutral. Beatrice turned to look at him directly. "You asked me once what I wanted. I've had time to think about that now. And I want to stop running," she said simply. "I want to find a place where I can build something lasting, something good. I want—" She hesitated, then continued more softly. "I want to be with someone who sees me for who I really am." Garrett's expression remained serious, but his eyes softened. "Beatrice, when I found you on that trail, beaten and half dead, all I could think was that I needed to keep you safe. But as the days passed, as I came to know you, your courage, your strength, your kindness, something changed." He reached for her hand, his rough fingers gentle as they enclosed hers. "I've spent 2 years alone on that ranch, telling myself it was what I wanted, but the truth is I was hiding, from people, from feelings, from life itself." His grip tightened slightly. "I don't want to hide anymore." "What are you saying, Garrett?" Beatrice asked, her heart beating faster. "I'm saying that if you wanted to stay in Texas, in Presidio, you wouldn't be alone. My ranch isn't much, but with time and work, it could be something to be proud of, something we could build together." Beatrice felt tears well in her eyes, but they were tears of a different kind than those she had shed since the attack on her family. "When you found me," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you told me I would heal slow and that you would wait. Did you mean it?" "Every word," Garrett replied, reaching up to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "I'll wait as long as you need, Beatrice." She leaned into his touch, covering his hand with her own. "I don't think I need to wait any longer, Garrett Graham. I know what I want now." Under the vast Texas sky, with the safety of the fort around them and the dangers behind them, Garrett drew her closer. His lips met hers in a kiss that spoke of promises, of healing, of a future neither of them had imagined before fate brought them together on a lonely trail. The trial of Frank Blackwell and his associates was held in El Paso 3 months later. Beatrice testified clearly and courageously, describing the attack on the wagon train and her subsequent captivity. Other witnesses came forward as well, ranchers who had been victimized by the gang, townspeople who had seen them flaunting their ill-gotten gains, even a former member of the gang seeking leniency through cooperation. The verdict was never in doubt. Frank Blackwell and his men were sentenced to hang for murder, kidnapping, and a host of other crimes. Justice had been served, though Beatrice found that the outcome brought her less satisfaction than she had expected. No punishment could bring back her father and brother or erase the memories of what she had endured. But as she left the courthouse on the final day of the trial, Garrett was waiting for her, hat in hand. "Ready to go home?" he asked simply. Home. Such a small word to carry so much meaning. She nodded, taking the arm he offered. "Yes," she said, I'm ready." They were married in Presidio a week later, a small ceremony attended by Marshal Hollister, who served as Garrett's best man, and a few townspeople who had come to know and respect them during the months of preparation for the trial. Mrs. Hollister had insisted on making Beatrice a proper wedding dress, and the marshal had a new suit shipped in from San Antonio for Garrett. "Never thought I'd see the day," Hollister commented during the modest celebration afterward. Graham was always the lone wolf type. "Figured he'd die an old bachelor out on that ranch of his." "Things change, Sam," Garrett replied, his eyes finding Beatrice across the room where she was chatting with the mayor's wife. "People change." "That they do," the marshal agreed, raising his glass. "To changes, then, and to the future." Their return to Garrett's now. Their ranch was like coming home in a way Beatrice had never experienced before. During the months they had been away for the trial, Garrett had arranged for improvements to be made. The cabin had been expanded with a proper bedroom added, the barn repaired, and the garden Beatrice had admired on her first day there had been tended and was thriving. "It's still modest," Garrett said as they stood together looking at their home in the golden light of sunset. "But it's a start." Beatrice leaned against him, a sense of peace settling over her that she had thought lost forever after the attack. "It's perfect," she said. "Everything we need is right here." The years that followed brought challenges, as life on the frontier always did. There were droughts that threatened their cattle, winter storms that tested the soundness of their home, and occasional trouble from rustlers or drifters passing through. But through it all, Garrett and Beatrice faced each challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each passing season. Their family grew as well. Their first child, a son they named William after Beatrice's father, was born a year after their marriage. A daughter, Margaret, followed 2 years later, and eventually another son, Samuel, named in honor of Marshal Hollister, who had remained a steadfast friend. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Garrett's careful management and Beatrice's diligent work transformed the modest homestead into a thriving operation. They added more land, more cattle, and even hired hands to help during busy seasons. The small cabin evolved into a proper ranch house, with room for their growing family and the occasional visitor. Chief Victorio and his people remained friends, trading with them and sometimes stopping by when hunting in the area. The turquoise amulet he had given Beatrice hung in a place of honor in their home, a reminder of the unexpected allies who had helped them in their time of greatest need. On the 10th anniversary of the day Garrett had found Beatrice on that dusty trail, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over the western mountains. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't decided to take that particular trail that day?" Beatrice asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Garrett put his arm around her, pulling her close. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember something my father used to say. There are no accidents in this life, only appointments we didn't know we had." Beatrice smiled at that. "An appointment with destiny, then." "Something like that," Garrett agreed. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "When I found you that day, beaten and afraid, all I could think was that you needed time to heal and that I would wait, no matter how long it took. I had no idea then that my own healing had just begun." "We healed each other," Beatrice said softly. "And we built something beautiful from the broken pieces." As they stood there, silhouetted against the fading light, their children's laughter carried on the evening breeze a sound of joy and innocence that neither of them had dared to hope for during those dark days when they had first met. Life in the wild Texas borderlands was seldom easy, but Garrett and Beatrice Graham had found in each other a strength and resilience that could weather any storm. From the ashes of tragedy, they had forged a love as enduring as the land itself, boundless, rugged, and true. And though they could not know what challenges the future might hold, they faced it together, secure in the knowledge that some bonds, once formed in the crucible of adversity, could never be broken.